Hello and welcome to another watercolor tutorial. In this video I'm going to show you how I painted this loose and atmospheric seascape watercolor painting, and I really hope you enjoy watching this tutorial. For this painting I'm using Arch 140 pounds rough surface watercolor paper, and as you can see my board is at an angle so the colors would naturally run down the page. I started by randomly wetting the top section of the paper, and the first color that I'm applying here is my purest color. That's why I'm applying it first, so I don't want it to get muddy, getting mixed with other colors. This is a very watered down version of raw sienna, and the next color is lavender. I took the excess water off my brush because the paper has already water in it and I don't want to have too much water on my brush so that the colors spread too much. Now I'm adding a very watered down version of cerulean blue chromium, and I want the tonal value to be very similar to lavender. That's why I added enough water to lighten the value of cerulean blue chromium. I'm sprinkling some table salt to create texture effects, and because the first wash is very light, these textures created by salt would be very subtle, so they would be suitable for sky. And while the paper is still damp, I'm using a smaller round brush to paint the shadow parts of the clouds. So the color that I'm using here is a mixture of Amethyst Genuine, which is a dark muted purple by Daniel Smith. You can mix a similar color by mixing a little bit of indigo or Payne's Gray into any purple that you have. And at this stage, I'm really taking the excess water off my brush. You can see the bristles of my brush, how dry they look, so that these clouds, these shadow colors don't spread too much all over the sky area. So I want them to hold their shape. Also, it's very important that you use the same paper that I'm using to have the same results, because if I was using cold press paper, same brand, same weight, but cold press, it would not stay wet as long as rough surface that I'm using for this painting. So in case you get frustrated with your paper drying too fast, this is just another thing that can keep your paper wet much longer, just to use a rough surface paper. Now because the block is at an angle, the bottom part of the sky was semi-wet, so I used a clean damp brush to soften the bottom edge and start painting the water. I'm using cerulean blue chromium to paint the water, and if you have trouble painting a straight line, you can let the sky dry completely and then use a washi tape on the horizon line and use that as your ruler to have a very straight line. I painted a simple blue wash for the water in the distance, and now I'm making some lines for some ripples, but I don't want to have too much details, especially when the water is really far away from us. So the more simple you keep it, especially in far away, the more you emphasize the illusion of distance. I'm also trying to vary my colors by using a few touches of lavender to have a more interesting effect. I decided to darken the water a little bit more, especially near horizon line, to have a higher contrast between the sky and the water. But at this stage I'm making sure that my brush is fairly dry. It's better to use freshly squeezed paint if you have trouble with controlling water paint ratio in your watercolors. That way you have more control how much paint and how much water is on your brush. I'm also splattering some paint using the same colors that I already used in the painting to have a more interesting surface. I usually use a toothbrush to splatter paint, but at this stage I want the splatters to be directed on top of the surface of the water. That's why it's much easier to use your brush to splatter. I'm also painting some darker ripples using Amethyst Genuine while the paper is still damp. While I'm painting the water, I'm basically painting around the wave that I'm going to be painting soon. So that line, the bottom line of the water that you can see is kind of an uneven line. That's going to be the top edges of the waves that we're going to be painting. So keep in mind not to keep that line too straight or artificial, just to keep it more organic and natural. For beginners, I highly recommend Arch 140 pounds rough surface watercolor paper. It just stays wet for much longer, and it's easier to work with, like for blending edges, working wet on wet, even working wet on dry makes your learning process much easier. Also, keep in mind that you can always wet the back side of your paper as well to help it stay wet much longer. I now switch to my smallest round brush. This is a Chinese calligraphy brush, and I'm just painting some ripples on top of the water. I want to have more details because this is much closer to us and we can naturally see more details. And I'm also trying to remind myself to have fun with it and have my brush dance on the paper so that the result of these marks are more random and they're not rigid and too organized. Also, I need to keep reminding myself not to overdo these ripples and any kind of mark makings in my paintings. And now it's time to paint the boats in the distance. I'm using my rigger brush. You can use any fine tip brush that you have available, but just make sure that you don't have too much water on your brush, because even if you're using a very small or rigger brush, if you have too much water on your brush, it would be much harder to create these very thin and detailed lines. I'm also painting a few details using white gouache. You can use any other white opaque medium that you have available, acrylic ink, acrylic paint, soft pastels, pastel pencils, markers, whatever you have available. This is the next day that I looked at my painting with fresh eyes, and I realized that the top edges of the wave was too blended, too soft, and it didn't have enough definition. So I'm adding a little bit more color. This is a mixture of lavender and cerulean blue chromium, just to add some definition for the top edges of the waves. I can add more color, make it darker, but I'm starting fairly light so that if I don't like the line or if I don't like the placement of the line, I can just simply add more water and erase it. But if I'm happy with it, I can add more color and darken it. I also decided to add more shadow color, more of the Amethyst Genuine to the bottom edges of the wave to create a better form of a rounded shape of the wave. This is after I took a picture of my painting and I turned it into black and white, and I was able to see where the painting was lacking the tonal value, so it didn't have the proper form. That's why I'm adding these shadow colors. And this is the finished painting. I really hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial. If you have any questions, don't forget to ask me in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy painting!